So as an administrator supporting any environment, we need an internet connection. What happens when our connection out to the internet goes down, especially if we depend on Microsoft Teams? Fortunately, Microsoft has a solution for us that will continue to allow us to make phone calls. And that is the Survivable branch appliance. And in order to use the SBA, we have to have a prerequisite where we have direct routing in place. So in this video, we'll talk once again what direct routing is, and we'll focus on the Survivable branch appliance. Now, direct routing is when we have infrastructure on premises that allows us to have connectivity out to the PSTN. But with direct routing, we have connectivity from the on-premises infrastructure out to Microsoft Teams. So our users would be able to take advantage of the Microsoft Teams features, but anytime they make an outbound call, that call would go out the SPC and eventually out to the ITSP or PSTN provider. So we point this out, direct routing, because the SBA or Survivable branch appliance is designed for direct routing within Microsoft Teams. So here, in the event that our internet connection is down, or possibly the connection is fine, but for whatever reason we cannot reach the Microsoft Teams environment, our user here can still receive inbound calls or make outbound calls onto the PSTN. And this is possible because the SBA, which is usually integrated with your SPC vendor, so I'll put SBA here, contains a local copy of the critical components that are needed for call handling. So your Teams client interacts with the SBA and therefore routes that call onto the SPC. So here we can see the real benefits that folks in our environment can still receive inbound calls or make outbound calls out to the PSTN. So once again, SBAs are used in scenarios where we have direct routing being used for Microsoft Teams, meaning that SBAs cannot be used with calling plans because calling plans are cloud-based. Now, the Survivable branch appliance is really distributed code that is provided by Microsoft. And this code is provided to vendors who then embed that code in their firmware for their SPCs. So at the time of this recording, here we have SPC vendors that also provide this SBA functionality. So let's talk a little bit more on how SBAs work. So let's say you have a supported SPC that also has that Survivable branch appliance functionality. During normal operation, so when we don't have an outage, the SBA syncs user data from Teams. So this can include user profiles, different policies, along with other configurations. So in the event that we have an outage here, users and their Teams client will switch over to the SBA automatically. If this user here was in an active call, that call will continue without any interruption. So during this time, any calls made, the call detail records, or CDRs, are still collected. And then once the internet connection is restored, then these records are loaded back up to Microsoft Teams. And one thing to keep in mind, we do have most of the functionality that we would need to make inbound and outbound calls. The SBA is not a replacement or a full feature replacement for Microsoft Teams. So let's go out to a document here. So if I scroll down a bit, we'll look at some of the features that are available to us. Right here, when the Microsoft Teams client is in offline mode, the following features are available. So we can make PSTN calls through the SBA and SPC. We could definitely receive PSTN calls. We can do hold and resume. We can do a blind transfer. We can also do call forwarding. So we can see some of the options here. But as time goes on, Microsoft adds additional options that weren't possible before. So one of the options here that we don't see available is voicemail. So once our internet connection is restored, at that point our Teams client is no longer connected to the SBA. He's now connected back to the Microsoft Teams cloud. Now from a high level, for all this to work, our Teams client needs to know which SBAs are available for each site, and also which SBAs are assigned to users in that site. So first we need to have our SBA. Then we have to create a policy, that being the Teams branch survivability policy. And then we have to assign that policy to users. And what this policy is doing is pointing to the SBA that anyone that has this policy will be using. Now, for user experience, the only indication that we have is that their Teams client will have a banner stating that they don't have any internet connection. That once that internet connection has been restored, then at that point, the banner is then removed from the Teams client. All right, so let's go back to our documentation here. So let's go back up to a section here. So as far as supported team clients, so we see here the SBA is supported for Microsoft Teams Windows Desktop, Mac OS Desktop, and also Teams Phone. So here we don't have any verbiage for the web client. And of course, that would make sense, right? Because we don't have an internet connection. So if we scroll down a little bit more, we'll see, once again, the features that are available at the time of this recording, along with the configuration, what's needed to put this in place. Now I want to go down to the SBC configuration. And here we see a list of SBC vendors that support the SBA functionality. And finally, I want to point out that the SBA relies on authentication tokens that are valid for 24 hours. And these tokens are renewed daily. So as we can guess, without an internet connection, we're not able to refresh the authentication tokens. So therefore, the SBA can only support outages for up to 24 hours. So definitely keep that in mind. And I also wanted to point out one more thing that I missed under configuration, that all configuration is currently done by the Teams PowerShell commandlets. So at the time of this recording, we can configure SBA via the Teams Admin Center. Now later in the course, we'll go ahead and configure an SBA policy. So in this video, we discussed the SBA or Survivable Branch Appliance. We saw the main benefit here is to allow inbound and outbound calls to the PSTN even though we lost our internet connection to Microsoft Teams. We also discussed SBAs are very designed for environments that are using direct routing. And we also saw that certain vendors or SBC vendors currently have that SBA functionality.
Thanks for watching. If you're interested in an IT career or looking to brush up your IT skills, check out cbtnuggets.com and sign up for a free trial.